The Gardener of Alcatraz, a true story. The boat chugged out of San Francisco and into the bay. Sound nice? It wasn't. This was no pleasure outing, let me tell you. Gulls squawked, a foghorn moaned, and Elliott Michener, prisoner AZ-578, stared into the fierce wind. Ahead loomed an island topped with a concrete fortress, watchtowers, and barbed wire. Alcatraz, the toughest prison in the country. As the 20 new inmates marched off the boat, Elliot felt full of dread. How had things gone so wrong? 5 years ago, he'd had life figured out. Printing counterfeit money, but making fake money was a crime. He'd been sent to the slammer, first in Kansas, now here in Alcatraz. Surrounded by water and steel bars, Elliot saw nothing but gray. There was no way he was staying here. He'd bust out and go back to counterfeiting, or maybe rob a bank. Sure, security was tight on Alcatraz. No prisoner had ever managed to escape. But Elliot was smart. Maybe he'd be the exception. As the days crawled by, he lay low. He endured the no-talking rules. He avoided the riots. He performed his dreary job, securing the ground for handballs that had been scouring the ground for handballs that had been knocked over the rec yard wall. Make no mistake, it was a tedious life. Until the day when, so they say, Elliot stumbled across something that was most definitely not a handball. A key. Elliot could have kept the key, tried it in every gate on the island. Why didn't he? Between you and me, he was probably scheming. He figured that if he did something honest, something you might not expect from a prisoner, it could pay off. So instead, he handed over that key. And our story takes a turn. Because, see, it just so happened that the big bosses on Alcatraz were looking for an inmate to help with the gardens, which sorely needed attention. Of course, it couldn't be just anyone. It had to be someone honest, someone they could trust with a little extra independence, someone who would, say, turn in a key. Elliot got the job. Now, Elliot didn't know a darn thing about plants, but he figured this job had to be better than picking up handballs. His first task was breaking up the soil on the island's west side and creating terraces. He threw himself into it. Gardening wasn't half bad. It was hard, satisfying work. Elliot decided he might as well get good at it. What's more, this job could be his ticket to freedom. The gardens were outside the prison walls. Elliot found a quiet spot where the guards couldn't see him and started building a contraption that he hoped would allow him to swim to shore. Once he was tinkering with some rubber tubing when a guard surprised him. Elliot croaked something about it being a sprinkling device. The guard swallowed the story, hook, line, and sinker. Whew. Elliot finished the terraces. He learned which plants went where and how much to water them. He was too busy to focus on his flotation device. As time passed, a funny thing happened. This gardening thing started to grow on him. He studied seed packets and books from the prison library. He built a greenhouse and tried out composting. He even created his own narcissus hybrid. Elliott Michener planted every square inch of the island that he could. Color spread from outdoors to in. Prisoners picked flowers to put in their water glasses. To get supplies, Elliot would talk a guard into buying him seeds or bulbs in the city. In exchange, Elliot would slip the guard some flowers for his wife. Elliot didn't think much about escaping anymore. 7 years passed. By now, Elliot had gotten such a good reputation that he was promoted to work for Warden Swoop and his wife in their home. Swell! His official job was keeping the house tidy and cooking the meals, but in his free time he kept on gardening. This jailbird, you see, had grown an honest-to-goodness green thumb. Mrs. Swope liked gardens too. The dignified lady and the tough Alcatraz inmate became friends. She loved roses, and he was happy to grow them for her. The two unlikely friends listened to the radio together, and they both enjoyed horse racing. They followed the races and cheered for their favorites. On Elliot's birthday, Mrs. Swope gave him a new pair of shoes. After a while, Elliot was taking care of the house for days at a time when the Swoops went away. They trusted him and treated him like a person, and that made life on Alcatraz bearable. The island had changed in the 9 years since Elliot had arrived. The gray was gone. In its place was green and other colors, pink snapdragons, red geraniums, purple irises. Elliot, too, had changed. He knew sedum from sage and dahlias from daffodils. He also had passion, pride, and solid skills. He could see a colorful future for himself, one that didn't involve breaking the law. And here is where our story takes another turn. One morning, Elliot got some unexpected news. He was leaving Alcatraz. He was going to Leavenworth, a lower security prison. Wouldn't you think he'd be pleased as punch? Nope, believe it or not. Elliot begged to stay in Alcatraz, the toughest prison in the country. But he had no choice. He packed his gardening manuals. And though color bloomed all around him, once again he saw nothing but gray. The boat chugged toward the city, and Elliott Michener, prisoner AZ-578 no longer, stared into the fierce wind as he left the island he had helped to transform. Leavenworth was bleak. There were no gardening jobs for prisoners. Elliot was desperate to get out. He knew what he had to do. Escape? No, sir. He stayed on his best behavior, kept out of trouble, and asked to get out early. And get out early he did. When Elliot was released for good behavior, he went to work on a farm in Wisconsin. For the first time in ages, he could breathe fresh air and grow his beloved flowers. Once more, color filled his life. Elliot never went back to crime. Gardening had, sure enough, been his ticket to freedom, just not in the way he'd expected. And then this tells more about him. Let's bring that in close in case you want to pause and read all of that, about how he was sick, homesick for Alcatraz. He had been a prisoner from 1941 to 1950. And then Alcatraz and its gardens, and tells the story of how the gardens happened, and more about the gardens and the inmates doing the gardens. And there's a picture of the Alcatraz gardens today, restored to their former glory. Yep. He said, "I am grateful for my introduction to the spade and the trowel, the seed and the spray can. They have given me a lasting interest in creativity." Elliott Michener. And that's it. That's the story of the Gardener of Alcatraz, a true story.